Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Yes, Cynthia Bamalu joins us. Thank she is the program officer for YIAGA Africa. She'll forgive me even if I make a mistake, which I did. Good morning, Cynthia. Good to see you anyways.
Yeah. Good morning, Chamber.
Well, election matters just all over our heads, so you could understand that sometimes. But for this Saturday, look, any candidate you speak to, they'll always tell you they'll win. All of them, even the one that joined politics yesterday, will say, I'm here to win. I need to win it. But, I mean, your team, you look at some of this data on a regular basis, so, and then probably that's one of the best ways to tell history, and then probably to look ahead in terms of what has happened before, what could likely happen. But having looked at all of this, just take us through probably an enlightenment scenario. What people need to look out for, what even determines who wins, what are those factors or key indications? Start from wherever you want.
Yeah, so on Saturday, March 18th, we'll have governorship elections and state assembly elections. However, we don't have governorship elections in all the 36 states. I remember that we have states due to court rulings, their electoral circle changed a bit. Yeah. So for instance, states like Kogi, Bayelsa, Imo states would not have governorship elections. Edo, Ondo states would not have governorship elections. Anambra and then Ekiti and Osun would not have governorship elections. However, they would have state assembly elections. So the governorship elections will be happening in 28 of the states, while the governorship will happen in 28 of the states, while you'd have the state assembly across the 36 states. The Federal Capital Territory has no elections because, it's not a state. And so those are where would be a lot of attention would be, I'm sure channels would be in all the states with the governorship elections. That's where the...
You're right on the money.
Yes, that's where it will be happening. Now, for the governorship elections, in states where we have the governorship and state assembly elections, every voter is expected to receive at least two ballots, to receive two ballot papers, one for the governorship, one for the state assembly elections. While in those states, these 8 states that I had mentioned that have only governorship elections, what we're expecting is that the voters will receive just one ballot paper to vote for their state assembly lawmakers. And so on elections, they just know that for these 8 states, you're voting for just the state assembly elections. Now, for the elections on March 18th, there are specific requirements to win the party and to win elections for governorship elections based on what the Constitution provides, but there are also important requirements to win the state assembly elections based on what the Constitution has also provided. And I think that's where it gets a bit tricky. And when you talked about candidates who are contesting, can they win the elections? Because it's beyond just winning a particular region of a state. Now, the beauty of the Constitution, or rather the spirit of the Constitution, envisages that for every state governor, that there is that requirement for the governor to have to win with some spread in the state, because states are not homogeneous. States have ethnic diversities, religious diversities, and because of these diversities, the Constitution wants that for everyone who wins an election, that there's some level of representation across respective lines, be it ethnic lines or religious lines in the state, which is why for the governorship elections, to win an election, a governor is a candidate who contests in this election. For any candidate to be determined as a winner would first need to secure majority of the votes cast, which is the highest number of votes. So majority of the votes cast. However, in addition to that, such an individual is expected to secure at least 1/4 of the votes, or what you call 25% of the votes cast, in at least 2/3 of the local government areas in the state. And so, for instance, if we have, this is the map of Ondo. I didn't want to use any of the states that have governorship elections so that people would not think I'm biased. But yeah, so this is a map of Ondo State, for instance. Ondo has 18 local government areas. And so for any governor to win in a state with about 18 local government area, using that example of Ondo, the governor would need to win highest number of votes, so majority of votes cast, and to win at least 25% of the votes in 12 local government areas. And so for those of us who are good in mathematics, if you're in a state with 30 local government areas, just go and do what is 2/3 of 30? If you're in 20, what is 2/3 of 20? And that is the only way a candidate will be declared. Now, the Constitution also imagines a situation, a scenario where a candidate may secure majority of the votes cast, but may not secure the required spread. That is the 25% in 2/3 of the local government areas. Now, in such an instance, what is required is that the Electoral Commission would appoint a date for a runoff. Now, the Constitution provides that within 21 days, where a candidate does not have the required spread, within 21 days, a second election will be conducted, which we call a runoff elections. But these elections will be conducted between two candidates. First, the candidate who scored the highest number of votes, and secondly, one among the remaining candidates who secured the majority of votes in the highest number of local governments in the state. And so there is no guarantee that the second candidate with the highest number of votes would be the candidate on the ballot for the runoff elections.
It could be the third.
It could be the third. What is important is that you have the highest number of votes in the highest number of local government areas. And in a situation where you have two candidates who had the highest number of votes in the highest number of local governments, then one amongst these two who had this majority amongst these two would be the candidate for the second election. And the idea is there is that need for representation across ethnic, religious, and other lines of diversities in a particular state, so that no governor would say, I won because only my people voted for me, or I won because only my faith or my religion voted for me. The idea is that every governor that emerges must be one that truly represents the state across different lines. So you must secure the votes of the candidates across those lines. And I think for these elections, it's going to be, we've seen from the presidential, they were quite contentious. And the way the maps changed, you know, from the presidential elections, we also expect that it could influence or inform the governorship elections, meaning it could be contentious. And we expect that some states, you'd have candidates who would struggle to get a spread. And if that is the case, the Constitution requires that that the Electoral Commission conducts a runoff within 21 days. Now, for the State Assembly elections, it's very simple.
I was just about to drag you there. Because you talked about how some states, some voters will only get a ballot in one state.
In one state,
So in a few states.
In a few states. For those states where you have, you have elections happening across 36 states, for state assemblies, about 993 state constituencies. Now, to win a state assembly elections, all a candidate requires a simple majority. And you may ask, why no requirement for the spread? Now, the idea is a lot of state assemblies represent the state constituencies that are either one local government area, two local government areas. Now, the idea is within local government areas, there's some level of homogeneity in the sense that you most likely have one ethnic group dominating, or even you almost have religious dominance within a local government or two local government areas. So that sense of homogeneity just requires that a candidate for state assembly just needs to win a simple majority. So the highest number of votes for that state constituency would get a candidate into the state assembly for these 36 states where elections will be conducted.
Well, I know that YIAGA Africa will be keenly watching the governorship elections. Are there any states that will be of particular interest to you? I mean, looking at how they performed in the governorship elections. I beg your pardon, the presidential elections.
Well, there are states that will be interesting. We'll be conducting the PVT in 3 states. Kano, you know why? Kano will be an interesting state to watch out for. We'll also be conducting that in Benue and in Delta State. However, would observe the governorship elections across all the states, especially the results coalition. Now, beyond Kano, we know that Lagos would be an interesting state to watch out for because we saw how the presidential elections went. Sadly, post that, there's been a lot around ethnic division and all of that, and I really hope that for these elections, Nigerians vote beyond ethnic and religious identities, but rather vote on competence, capacity, and character, because that is what determines quality leadership. But we also know that states like Zamfara will be an interesting state also because of, we follow the politics of the APC, PDP in that particular state. And then I talked about, I mentioned Benue already. Nasarawa is also an interesting state. If you noticed the elections in Nasarawa, you had different parties winning at the National Assembly elections. Yeah. So you could have a constituency where APC, PDP, Labour Party got Senate, House of Reps, and then the presidential votes. So Nasarawa is going to be an interesting state because one is a diverse state, ethnic and religious-wise, and for these elections, a lot around identity will be defining the elections. I think Plateau would also be interesting. Rivers, sadly, because if you follow the conversation in the presidential elections, it was contentious, but we did raise queries around the results from Rivers. There were lots of inconsistencies in the results from Rivers State. We've also seen pre-election violence in the state, and we think that is going to be quite contentious.
What about, is there any latest development concerning some states? Because I think we heard in the news how they said they didn't want any observers, they needed to leave. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so I think that was a report from Adamawa, for one. However, we got reports yesterday from our state coordinator that the governor reviewed the directive and said observers can...
Adamawa or Zamfara?
No, Zamfara was before the elections, okay. Zamfara earlier. Adamawa was post the presidential elections. There was this directive that CSO and NGO activities were banned in the state. So the reversal we had was for Adamawa. We've not gotten any update on Zamfara. However, we did have observers who observed in Zamfara. We only had an issue within our observers, and we had state security coming in and requesting for if we had the permission to train observers pre the presidential elections. And we just said, well, we are accredited by INEC. We don't need to get permission when we know that there was no major security threat. However, Adamawa had said observers cannot, but this didn't make it to the news, because we were expecting that the way the first directive made it to the news would also have the review to the news also, just so that you don't have overzealous security personnel harassing observers. But it just shows that governorship elections would be, if not more contentious than the presidential. If you remember, in 2019, we had governorship elections that were more inconclusive. You know, some of them ran beyond the date because they were inconclusive. We're hoping that this time around, INEC sticks to the rule when it comes to deployment of the beavers, that ensures that it's 100% deployment, that they are used optimally. The result portal, we also hope it is used optimally this time around, and that there is early commencement of polls across board.
That it's even used at all, because,
yes.
Because well, the key was that it wasn't used at all.
For the presidential, there was a lot of delays, but we're hoping that this time around it is used optimally across the states where we have elections. But for the voters, you know, for post-elections, a lot of voters said we wouldn't vote. Some of them were breaking their PVCs, which is wrong. Yeah, you don't break your ATM card because the ATM did not, the machine did not give you some money. And so why destroy your card because you were unhappy with the process? I think for voters, it's important you protect your PVC and please vote. These elections are even, if not more important than the presidential elections.
Let's go to Lagos.
Yes, thank you, Chamberlain. Cynthia, I'm just wondering, you know, when you talked about the conditions for a runoff election in the governorship election, in the extreme case where, you know, there are two candidates that have majority votes in 2/3 of local government, what will INEC then do? Which of the candidates will INEC pick to be the second candidate for the runoff?
Yeah, so in a situation where you have two candidates who had the highest number of votes, highest number of local governments, that is in determining the second candidate for a runoff, the Electoral Commission would identify the candidates with the higher number of votes. So it could be by one vote. And the idea is when you have two candidates, there's no way you would have two candidates with 100 votes exactly, and then they have the highest number of votes across the local government area. There's always a likelihood that one of them would have, even if it's just one vote ahead of the other candidate, that is the candidate that would be the second candidate on the ballot for the runoff.
Just hoping again that there'll be no variation, no candidates, two candidates with the exact number of votes in the 2/3 local government. Also, in terms of, you know, the result of the governorship elections. We've had Mr. Mike Igini express concern that there are some local governments, some states with local governments that have odd numbers rather than even numbers, and this scenario could present a difficulty in calculating, you know, the results of elections in those states. What would then be, you know, the choices available to INEC, you know, to adopt in determining the outcomes of elections in those states?
Yes, very valid point. So you have states with, for instance, 20 local government area. I think Lagos has 20 LGAs. It means 2/3 would be about 13.3. I hope my math is correct. So it gives you a decimal point. And I think there's that worry around what happens in states where the local government numbers are odd numbers, and once you do the calculation, it gives you it ends to the decimal point that either requires a rounding up or what have you. Now, what we've learned from previous elections is that INEC is empowered to make that determination. And so in instances where, for instance, you have a division that gives you, for instance, 12.5%, our mathematics, the little knowledge of arithmetic is that once you have 0.5, you could round it up. Now, that is left for the Electoral Commission to decide or determine. And we know that there could be that likelihood. I gave an example with Lagos already. However, if I'm working with maths, if it's less than 5.5, you just stick with the number. You don't need to round up once it's less than 5. However, INEC will determine or decide that, and we wait to see what the Electoral Commission would decide in case we run into those kinds of scenarios.
You know, the underlying assumption of any election is that people will actually come out to vote. That's why we prepare for the elections. And I think that's been a major issue, which we've referenced during the course of this conversation. We saw a shocking 24.9 million people, or at least total votes cast, amidst the controversies. And for a lot of people, people had projected a certain percentage, even better than what we had seen in the past. But clearly, this is even, it falls short of the projections. And a lot of people are even anticipating that the turnout for this election might be lower, which is why this conversation is important. But it is beyond us, really. We have INEC, which has its major role, voter education and building trust, security agencies as well, essentially the whole stakeholders. What must INEC still do? I mean, we have a day or two to the elections. What should INEC be doing now, or what should they still do to build that trust up to a point that people will maybe forget what they witnessed in the February 25th election and, against all odds, come out to vote on Saturday?
Yeah, you know, sadly, people can't easily forget. However, INEC has that responsibility to rebuild trust. And I wish the Commission had invested a lot in communication post the presidential elections, at least hosting press conferences and hosting engagements to provide clarification on some of the challenges and update the people on steps taken to address those challenges ahead of the governorship elections. But INEC still has at least 24 hours to do that today and tomorrow. Provide updates on their plans for the elections, logistics especially, ensuring that we have early commencement of polls, sufficient deployment of materials, and that the technology works, both of the technology, so the BVAS and the INEC result viewing portal. However, for voters, I also think we need to, we have that responsibility to come out and vote. Like I said, you mentioned already, the numbers for presidential elections were really poor. But we hope that for these elections, Nigerians understand that these state elections are really important. It determines development at the state level. We need governors that can build states that are economically viable. These days, we have states that are struggling, and we can only do that when we vote right. So for Nigerians, beyond the challenges in the last elections, we cannot win if we keep quitting. And I believe that for these elections, we need to turn out in our numbers and vote in the people that we believe will represent our interests in government.
Yeah, I need to have questions. You could go to the election body, right?
Yeah, yes. If you have questions, election body is there, and it provides you, you know, simplified information around the electoral process. For us, information is key for elections. If you just go, it's a WhatsApp chat, you have the numbers on the screen, or you use the link. Once you type in hello using the number, you have a response, and you have a list of issues that you can identify where your issues are. You just send a response, and they provide you all the answers that you need. So the numbers are there: 0906 283 0860 on WhatsApp. Just put it on, and election bodies, it's like your friend providing information on the elections.
Yeah, they need to remember their vote is their power.
Yes, please,
so
please.
make use of it.
Please vote.
All right, Cynthia Mbamalu, Director of Program, YIAGA, thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you so much.